Okay, so we talked conceptually about what elasticity is and why it's important. Formally, the formula for elasticity is it's the percentage change in quantity for a given percentage change in price. Remember, we talked about it being the responsiveness. So it's how quantity demanded responds to a change in price, how big the percent change in quantity is relative to the percent change in price that generated it. When you change your price, it's going to change your quantity demanded. Law of demand, right? Lower price, higher quantity demanded, higher price, lower quantity demanded. That's just the law of demand. So we know that, but what elasticity tells us is which is bigger, what's happening to quantity or what's happening to price. And that's going to have implications, as we talked about, for total revenue. So this is the formal equation for what elasticity is, how we calculate elasticity. It's, remember that triangle means change. So it's the percentage change in quantity relative to a percentage change in price. And we use percentages because that gives us a lot better picture of responsiveness. Because think about it. Let's say I drop my price by $1 and my quantity goes up by 20 units. Is that responsive or not responsive? I don't know. It depends, right? It depends on what was priced to start with and what was quantity to start with. It's really different if I'm selling coffee and I was originally charging $2 a cup and I was selling 600 cups of coffee. In that case, I cut my price in half and I only sold 20 more units. That's like not even 10%. That's like 3% more. I cut my price in half and my sales went up by 3%, 3.3%. Not very much. That's not very responsive. But what if I were selling cars and my original price was $20,000 and my original quantity was 40 in a month? That would be saying I dropped my price from $20,000 to $19,999, and I went from selling 40 cars to selling 60 cars. Like a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage drop in price and a 50% increase in my sales. That would be hugely responsive. So the same $1 drop in price and the same 20 unit increase in quantity indicates a lot different responsiveness depending on what the initial price and quantity were. And so that's when we say percentage change, because I know percentages, sometimes people start freaking out and knowing out, here's the math stuff. We just use percentage change because it tells us the change in quantity relative to what quantity is. And the percent change in price is the change in price relative to what it is. So that's the reason we use the percentage change, just because it's telling us, yeah, price fell by $1, but what does that mean? Was that a 50% drop in price or was that a 1% drop in price? Because we would expect a lot more responsiveness from that $1 price change if it's a 50% drop in price. And so when we say percentage change, that's what we're talking about. And we're not going to, in this class, go any further into the formula for elasticity. You see in your readings, there's places where they do the whole midpoint formula and calculation and all of that and calculating the percentages. I'm not so concerned with that. I'm concerned much more with you understanding the concept. You're probably not going to become economists and calculate elasticities, but you may hire economists, or you may work for a company and there may be a situation in which you need to know the elasticity, where it's very valuable to know the elasticity. And yeah, you may hire an economist to estimate it for you. I was hired when I was at Duke and when I was doing my graduate work to estimate the elasticity of demand for enrollment, because they were looking to target their financial aid and they wanted to know how responsive different groups of students with different characteristics would be to different changes in prices, so they could target their financial aid where they would get the greatest response. those are the sorts of things that businesses really need to know. So you may not calculate elasticity, so that's why I'm saying I don't care so much about the calculation of where the percentages come from and all that, because you're not going to do that in your life. But you very well may be in a situation in which it's valuable for you to understand the concept of elasticity and what it means. And so it's the percentage change in quantity with a percentage change in price. It tells us how responsive quantity demanded is to a change in price. And again, by the law of demand, these move in opposite directions. So if quantity is going up, price is going down. If quantity is going down, price is going up. So technically this term is always negative because the numerator and denominator always have opposite signs. If one's changing in one direction, the other is changing in the other direction. Technically always negative. When we think about it and we talk about the value for elasticity, we usually think about it in the absolute value, just the absolute magnitude of the number, because what we really want to know, we know they move in opposite directions. We know the law of demand. What we really want to know is how big that change in quantity is relative to that change in price. How large in magnitude. So we typically look at the absolute value. We already know it's negative. But what we're concerned about is how large. So if the absolute value of elasticity is greater than 1, that would imply that the percent change in quantity is bigger than the percentage change in price. If this fraction is bigger than 1, it means the numerator is bigger than the denominator. It means what's happening to quantity is bigger than what's happening to price. This is what we call elastic demand. It represents fairly responsive demand. If we raise our price by 1%, our quantity change decreases by more than 1%. Whatever percentage we change our price by, our quantity changes in the opposite direction by more than that. So it's fairly responsive. And so what that tells us, if the absolute value of elasticity is greater than 1, if what's happening to quantity is bigger than what's happening to price, that's saying an increase in price leads to a bigger decrease in quantity. And a decrease in price leads to a bigger increase in quantity. Oh, I put a P there. What's happening to quantity is bigger than what's happening to price when demand is elastic, when that absolute value of elasticity is greater than 1. And so that tells us, if you think about it, it should make sense conceptually. If we raise our price, our quantity is going to fall, law of demand, but what's happening to our quantity is bigger than what's happening to our price. So our price is going up, but our quantity is falling by even more. So our total revenue is going to end up falling. What we gain from charging a higher price is going to be more than offset by what we lost because our quantity is falling so much. And the reverse is also true. If we lower our price, we're going to sell more, and we're going to sell so much more because people are so responsive that even though we're charging a lower price, we're selling so much more that our total revenue is actually going to increase. What's happening to quantity is bigger than what's happening to price. And so what's happening to quantity determines what's happening to total revenue. Yes, they move in opposite directions. Yes, they have effects in opposite directions on total revenue. What elasticity tells us is which of those is bigger. So it tells us what's going to happen to total revenue. And again, think about it conceptually. Think, if demand is elastic, it's fairly responsive. It's saying what's happening to quantity is bigger than what's happening to price. We know they move in opposite directions. We know if we raise price, we're going to sell less. But if demand's really responsive, we raise price, we sell so much less that our revenue falls. We lower price, we sell so much more that our revenue increases. As opposed to, if in absolute value, those lines mean absolute value, all that means is that we're ignoring the sign of this. We don't care that it's negative. We know it's negative. We don't care. What we're talking about is the absolute magnitude of these numbers. How big is that change in quantity relative to that change in price? That's what those lines mean. That's just saying we're just concerned about the magnitude of these numbers. We don't care about the sign. And if that's less than 1, if our numerator, percent change in quantity, is less than our denominator, percent change in price, so if the numerator is smaller than the denominator, that fraction is going to be less than 1 in absolute value. That's what we call inelastic demand. It's not that there's no responsiveness, but it's not as responsive. Fairly non-responsive. Not perfectly non-responsive, but it's just saying we raise our price and people don't respond much. So something like gasoline, right? Demand for gas is fairly inelastic. When the price of gas goes up, yeah, people might use a little bit less, but they still have to go to work and they still are driving whatever car they're driving, at least right away. As more time passes, they may have more time to find substitutes and demand may become more and more elastic. But the demand for gas is fairly inelastic. You raise price, yeah, quantity is going to fall some, but not that much. And so when demand is inelastic, if you raise your price, it's going to decrease your quantity, but the decrease in quantity is going to be small relative to the increase in price. People aren't going to respond that much. And if you lower your price, yeah, you're going to sell more, but not that much more. Think about it like as a drug that people need. You know, if you raise your price, some people will stop buying it because that happens. Unfortunately, people can't afford medicine as it gets more expensive. But you're not going to see a really significant decrease. And if the price is cheaper, it's not like people are all of a sudden going to say, "Oh, I'm going to buy a lot more of this." Some people may buy it that couldn't afford it before, but it's not like there's going to be this huge responsiveness. And so, yeah, they move in opposite directions. But you raise your price, you're charging more for everything. And you're selling less, but not that much less. And so what you gain from raising your price more than makes up for what you lost from decreasing your quantity, and your total revenue goes up. Here, when you lower your price, again, people aren't that responsive. So you're charging less, you're selling more, but not that much more. People are like, whatevs. You're charging less, you're not selling that much more. And so your total revenue goes down. When demand is inelastic, what's happening to price is bigger than what's happening to quantity. So what's happening to price determines the impact on your total revenue. And so that's really important. This is why elasticity matters so much. It's one thing to know your demand curve is downward sloping, but that doesn't tell you when you change your price, what's going to happen to your revenue. And that's something it's really fundamentally important to understand.